was delightful when I first told Felicia that I'm going to be joining Hitachi Vantara and coming here for a Hitachi Vantara meeting. And then I said, maybe we could do something for the IABC group while I'm here. And she said, yeah, we can do something for IABC, and we're going to do something for HSBC. So this took on much bigger proportion. What I hope to be able to do is take you on a journey sort of through both Silicon Valley, but also a journey through some technology as well. And what I hope to be able to do is give you a little bit of a glimpse into some of the driving forces behind the innovation that I've sort of had a chance to grow up and learn around. I will also say that I will do it in a relatively simple form because I am not a technologist. I enjoy hanging around technology people because I think they're brilliant in many ways. And what I'll show you are sort of some of these trends that I think will affect us. And it used to be things that affected us first at the job, because that was like way cool. I mean, when you first would go to work, and especially when I started working for major employers, they had all the cool technology. I mean, if you go to work, the stuff that they had, I mean, these phones that you looked at that had buttons on them and things like Watts lines and tie lines and ways to connect, you just didn't have at home. Things have changed a lot. And the technology that once was sort of only found in corporations is now the kind of stuff that you can find at the Apple store, at the Microsoft store, that your kids probably know as much, if not more, than you do about this technology. And it's true for me as well. So I need to get that slide up there, don't I? Or yeah, technical. We're going to talk about technology, and Paul ran over to the other room to be able to make things happen. So I don't know if he's listening, but
Sorry, I don't know how to switch over.
Okay. I can do this without the slides too, or I could get my slides up here and let you know. So some observations in general, but I think the power shift, one of the things is it's taken place, is it's moved from the purview of just being in corporations into the individuals. In fact, I think a lot of people who are coming out of school will come into a corporation and say, there's a limit to the number of email messages that I can have in my mailbox. I don't have that at home. You expect me to use this phone thing? You know, this, you're handing me this, it's like 4 generations ago. We now have access to tools and toys and pieces of technology that are so far ahead of what it is that most people had. I keep looking at this too. I have one of these, which is very helpful because it tells me whether my exercise is right. And the other thing it does for communication people, it reminds you have to stand up like once an hour. You know, you've been comatose for too long, you've been plastered to your screen, get up. But you know that the computing power in one of these Apple Watches is more than what was in a Cray supercomputer 2 back in the 1980s. We have been able to take this power, compute power, driven by the technological advances that I'll describe in some of these slides, and put it to work for all of us. Now what I will do also, besides taking sort of this voyage, I also want to then talk about some of the trends that I see that are most important, that are coming into play, and maybe reflect on how those will impact what it is that we do as communications people. I also have been at this long enough, I think, that I don't tend to want to chase the shiny bright objects, because I think that's often something that all of us do. I can't imagine, for example, there are people who camp out for the latest iPhone and get wristbands and wait in line for the newest technology, and I'm not one of those people. At the same time, I will also admit that I like to get this stuff and play with it. So how many people talk to Siri? Yeah. And how many people talk to Alexa? Yeah. So see, you're playing with the technology in some ways before it's been perfected. I mean, those two ladies, they're great and they are very helpful at times. Sometimes you end up yelling at them. And if you really want to be amused, if you have not seen, there's one video clip that I just adore, and I'll just tell you about it and you can watch it a little bit later. On Saturday Night Live, there was a thing for a silver version of Alexa, made for the greatest generation. And it was sort of based on the idea that a lot of people don't know, especially the older group, don't know how to make technology work. So that was, it's a great little thing, and things like, a guy saying to one of his buddies, Alexa, how many did old Satchel Paige strike out last night in the baseball game? And Alexa answers, Satchel Paige died in 1982. And he goes, yeah, but how many did she get? And she goes, Satchel Paige is dead. And he goes, I don't know about that. So we all have our little obstacles to overcome. What I'm going to do, though, is start sort of this base level, sort of technology, and talk a little bit about the silicon itself, then move up to some hardware. I still find it amazing that you are carrying with you, in a sense, a broadcast studio. I mean, you have a camera that's better than what most people had in the 1960s and 1970s. You have editing capabilities that nobody else had. You have a broadcast capability through something like Periscope, where you can put out messages from your pocket. So the technology has allowed us to do some things and give us the tools to be able to move a lot further. But it's not just the tools and the technology, it's the software and the apps behind that. Where today it's just how do you Google something to find out what's going on. You don't have to know the Dewey Decimal System. You don't need to go to a card catalog. You don't have to go to a library. You can just ask Alexa or do your own Google search on things. But it's also changing the way the world interacts and social interactions too. So we'll explore a little bit of that. What I also say is that I am definitely not a futurist. I love hanging around these brilliant people who come up with these prognostications of what it's going to be, and I'm not quite there, but I hang around enough smart people and sort of develop my own thoughts on what's important and what's not, but we'll talk a little bit about that. And what I want to do then is just sort of move through first the physical part of things. If you haven't been to Northern California, the San Francisco Bay Area, the area that is considered Silicon Valley is this little territory that goes from sort of Palo Alto up at the north end down to San Jose at the tail end of things, and out of which the names that are so familiar, the logos that you know, the companies. This is the ones that make it, because there are thousands of startups that have these brilliant ideas, and they've got some venture capital behind them, and they just sort of fizzle, or they got bought out by somebody else. But if you are a little bit more generous in your definition of what Silicon Valley is, and draw the circle a little bit bigger to include San Francisco, you start to see some other technologies that are newer than some of the established ones. It's weird to think of things like a Cisco at 35 years old as being old, or an HP at 60 years old as being ancient. But compared to something like an Airbnb, which just had this huge ramp up, the biggest hotel lodging chain that doesn't own a single property, or Uber being one of the largest transportation companies that doesn't own a single vehicle of its own. Amazing technology out of the Silicon Valley territory and that sort of Northern California. Some people that have helped drive things too that I think you're probably at least aware of the first guy. If out of the five, I would say if you knew any one of the names, it's probably that one. Gordon Moore is the guy who started Intel, and he's the one who's known for Moore's Law, and that's really the force on the economic side that's been able to drive what it is that we want to be able to do with our technology. So Moore's Law is that number of transistors, sort of the compute power available from silicon doubles about every 18 months, which is why there's that iPhone X that came out, and then there'll be an 11, and then there'll be all, because they can do that much more raw processing power every 18 months. And it's what also drives the obsolescence of these things too, and why it becomes almost disposable kinds of things. And you have to keep up with the race, because once you get on the train, there's no stopping. So Moore's is probably the one that I think people have asked, when is this going to stop? Is it going to stop? Because they keep making the geometry smaller and smaller on these transistors and the circuits, but most people I have been talking to see no end to this ability to be able to do this, because they're starting to work in nano geometries on silicon with all sorts of new ways of processing it. The next guy, Robert Metcalfe, came up with his own law that really talked about how do you network these things together. And he was a networking genius, and what he said was that the value of the network increases based upon the number of things you have hooked to it. So a fax machine by itself does no good, because there better be one on the other end. But the network gets more valuable if you have more fax machines. And some of you don't even know what fax machines are because you're too young, but there were these things that at one point, the first one I ever saw, you put a sheet of paper on a drum, you picked up the phone and you had to dial the other end, and you put the cradle holding in the headset, and then it would take 6 minutes for a page to transmit. But that was still faster than, sending it via airmail post across the world. So the value of the network really depends upon how many people you've got connected to the thing, and the more people that you have connected, the thing gets much more valuable, and you found that to be true. Now, that's just sort of the numbers side of things. I think important not only is the quantity, but also the quality, and that's where Keogh's law comes in. And what he was able to say was, if you really want to have an effective network, you need to have a divergent, both geographically kind of thing, but also a diverse network. You want it not to be homogeneous, you want to have, a network that's built up of all sorts of minds and people and geographies, and it becomes a much more valuable tool if you can do something that way. And then I think not only is the quality of the network and the quantity in the network, but then how does the network behave, with what's in the network. And here I go to a guy named Doc Searles, who is one of the authors on one of my favorite books, Clue Train Manifesto. The original Clue Train Manifesto came out a decade plus ago, and they just revisited it and reissued it. And what he says is that internet, once you get everybody hooked together and it's a diverse crowd, changes the conversation. I think this is the most important for us as communications people, from the typical one-way, top-down driven kind of a model that most of us in communications were most comfortable with, where we control the message, to one which became a two-way conversation where sometimes the most authoritative people in the network are not the ones on top. And we see that in things like the Gallup polls. The least trusted people are politicians, and we certainly see that in the US, and other countries around the world as well. We don't have a monopoly on that. Politicians, even senior leaders in organizations today, are much less trusted. The people who are most trusted in those Gallup surveys, if you look at, are someone like me. That, to me, is reinforcement of that value of this network, the social media fabric that exists out there, and it's why the conversation can't be one way, top down. It has to involve people, because some of the most credible people are the ones at the fringe and not at that little power center. So Doc Searles, if you haven't read the book, it's worth doing. Conway's law is almost a warning to us. And the way I look at this one is, his statement really is, if you're in the business of designing systems and doing things a certain way, the next thing you're going to design is going to look a lot like what you designed in the past, because that's the way you're set up. So your organization probably reflects the processes you have in place, the whole structure of things, and you're constrained, which in some ways is an inhibiting factor, but in some ways it's also a governor on this runaway opportunity that exists out there in the wild, wild west of the internet and social media and everything else. Because I think at some point we need to figure out what the rules are and have some stability, even though it's going to become increasingly difficult, because all of you experience, not only does the technology change, but then even the mores and the rules and the way we approach these things are going to change with time too. So those are some of the rules developed in Silicon Valley. I would also say that the engineers, the people who develop all this cool stuff that I get to work with a lot, are a different breed in some ways. Their DNA is different. And those of you who work in technology companies or have, there's some nice things we can say about them. The one thing I really love to say about them is that they are never satisfied with the status quo. So this whole idea of change is nothing new to them. They see an object, a thing, and say, I could make that faster, I could make that more powerful, I could add this feature, I could do that. So the idea of change, which is a scary concept in many organizations, is not to them. There are other things that they don't like changing in their world, but technology is one. In fact, the one thing you often have to do is get them to calm down and stop wanting to change things and introduce a product, because they'll, given their own devices, they'll just keep inventing and reinventing and modifying and adding product features to it, and at a certain point We say, shoot the engineer and release it to the marketplace. So they just see the world in a different way, and I think what often is really fun is just sort of to pick their brains. The other one I remember sitting down on an airplane with was a Mutual Admiration Society, a colleague from engineering, and I got sort of stuck in seats next to one another on a flight from Philadelphia back to the Bay Area. And I was like, I don't know how you do it. You know, how do you come up with these great product ideas? And he said, you know, this is actually really simple stuff. Because, you know, after you've taken classes and you learn there's basic things that are inputs and there are basic things that are outputs, and you know, it's all a matter of just trying all these different permutations and combinations. It's very simple. He said, I don't know how you do what you do in communications, because you guys are dealing with human beings. And human beings are like the most difficult thing to program. You never know how they're going to react or what they're going to say, or so it became one of those, I think there's a mutual admiration. We both need one another. You know, they can apply some discipline, they can provide us with the excitement, the technology, the tools to challenge us on some fronts. Then we can bring them back to saying, but it has to be useful, it has to be grounded. We're the ones who I think insist upon directions that are simple for people to understand and use. And I actually think that there are some companies that do things really well and some that do them less well. I remember seeing, I probably shouldn't mention real names, but Oracle, if you have to deal with Oracle R11 or R12, there are things like a field you get to and you fill in all this, and then it says, do you really want to enter this? And to me, the answer to that question would be yes or no, and there's no yes or no buttons anywhere on the screen, and there's no enter. You sort of, you look hard enough, somewhere there's a thing called submit, which sounds almost like a giving up. Okay, I submit. So they need some help, I think, from us in terms of some of these user interfaces to be able to make them friendly. So we can help the engineers just like they can help us in their lives. And I also say that Silicon Valley is not the only place that has this, you know, sort of monopoly on great ideas. So while it's a hotbed, and part of that is driven by the history of a close proximity to Stanford University. A lot of people graduated from Stanford, went to school at Stanford from all over the world, and then got hired by a company there and just like it, living in this place, which used to be the Garden of Heavenly Delights. It was like a produce section that grew fruits and vegetables and just, you know, amazing bounty. Now it's all concrete and high tech, and you have to go into the hills to be able to find wines and vineyards that used to grow on the flatlands. You have to travel to the Central Valley to find the fruits, vegetables, and nuts and stuff. So there are places, though, I mean, Ireland, you know, Bangalore, India has its own version of Silicon Valley. You know, China, Russia have pockets where they're encouraging the technology. So what once was just true in Silicon Valley, you can pretty much find it anywhere you want to on the face of the planet. So we definitely don't have the monopoly on this stuff. But I think what we have all collectively accomplished is a world now where technology is pervasive. And I didn't really understand the working definition of pervasive until I talked to a guy who said, my definition of pervasive is when you notice something because of its absence rather than its presence, which had me thinking a little bit. But the idea is, if you walked into a hotel room anywhere in the world and didn't find a flat screen TV, or you didn't find a telephone, you go, something's missing. Something's not right here. I think we're getting that way with a lot of stuff. Wi-Fi, it's like, what? There's no Wi-Fi? It's not free Wi-Fi? What gives? Or you're on a plane now, and it's like, you mean you guys don't have Wi-Fi? There's no plug for me to plug in my, you know, device to be able to charge it while I'm flying? I heard a comedian one time talk about how he was on an airplane and the pilot came on and said, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, you know, the Wi-Fi is not going to be available because of the problems. The guy sitting next to him goes, what? No Wi-Fi? You know, what am I going to do for, you know, 3 hours on the plane? And it's like, you know, you're flying 7 miles above the Earth's you know, surface in an aluminum tube at 600 miles per hour, and you're worried about whether or not you can do Wi-Fi for a few hours. You know, think of the technology. We're just keeping you at that altitude. Don't worry about the Wi-Fi. Don't get that. So technology is pervasive. We have come to expect it. We can't do without it. I live in Northern California. We had wildfires a year ago that pretty much wiped out parts of Santa Rosa. And you became very instantly aware of how reliant you are on technology. I got a text message from a person in San Francisco, a friend, who said, "Are you okay?" And this was at 5 in the morning, and it's like, well, I'm awake. And he said, "No, the fire." So I went and I moved my curtains aside, and normally where it's dark was orange, and normally where the sun was coming up at orange, it was dark. And so I said, I better find out what's going on. And my internet, which is provided by my cable company, was down. And so I was like, okay, that means the television set is also down, because that's cable. I was able to go find an AM radio that was sort of stuck in the back. And I did have my cell phone, the cell service was still there, but you realize quickly, I turned on the television set. My favorite was Comcast, which was our service provider, had a screen up that said, "Something's not right." And it wasn't for several weeks. And we were lucky we didn't lose anything, but I have friends who were in terrible straits. But finding that AM radio and figuring out how you could do it. And I was proud of myself. I was geek enough to be able to put together a hotspot off of my phone, to plug the computer in, to be able to continue to connect with work, saying, if you don't hear from me right away, it might be because there's like this raging wildfire 5 miles away from my house, and I might pull the plug and be evacuated at some point. So just don't expect me to be really productive today, because my attention is elsewhere. So the technology is pervasive. We rely upon it so much to be able to do everything in our lives, from work to everything else. Video is an increasingly important part of that. In fact, the Cisco projection is that by the year 2020, 82% of all the internet traffic is going to be video. And you can think of that as, oh yeah, it's YouTube videos. It's those amazing cat videos playing the piano. It's those viral videos, but it's also the video conferencing like we're using now. It's FaceTime that you guys are using with family and friends. It's moving away from some of the ways we've traditionally communicated back to, in a sense, the spoken word that was how we got into this whole world in the first place. The other thing that's fascinating is I could sit here and pull up. I actually took my phone out of my pocket because I didn't want it to ring or do anything weird, and so it's over there, but I always like using it as a prop. On my phone, I can actually call up my security camera and see what's going on in the middle of the night in my home. Of course, I'm hoping there's nothing going on in the middle of the night in my home, but to do that, to be able to watch live streaming of sports, to be able to see news anywhere and everywhere is pretty amazing when you think about what the technology is able to help us do. We're also awash in data. Not only do I have my little Nest video camera, I also have a Nest thermostat, and every month I get a report about how much energy I've been able to save and how I'm compared my data compared to all the other users in the neighborhood and the state. They are collecting so much data. I mean, there are things like GE jet aircraft engines that are sending telemetry back all the time that you hope at some point will be able to predict when it needs to be repaired ahead of needing to be repaired. Everything, including at some point, sensors that are going to be in fields are going to be able to tell farmers when to water, when to pick. We'll be able to help you track food. So perhaps some of these wacky diseases that move through the food chain, they'll be able to track and maybe cut off before they happen. But the amount of data that's being collected is amazing, and I think one of our jobs is going to be helping to interpret and make sense of some of this stuff for our various audiences. We are going to have so much stuff that we're going to be part of the team. I mean, there are people who specialize in this, but we're going to be part of the team that has to help figure out and explain to people the meaning behind some of all of this stuff that's being collected. Not only the personal data, which we have to protect and figure out all those sorts of things, but also just this, the world in which I live, which is data rich, what does it mean? I'm sort of hinted at this. I think we are moving back to more spoken word, the storytelling, and away from the written word. And when you think about it, theoretically, the first was all, people around a campfire telling stories, and somebody would come back from a trading trip and they would meet at the crossroads and share stories. And it was only when we started figuring out how to do alphabets and, printed things with Gutenberg and the movable type and all that stuff, that was the way you were able to spread the word broadly. Well, now we have the technology that we don't necessarily have to keyboard everything. One is you could use voice recognition and say the words and it'll get captured fairly accurately. You can actually now even say the words in one language and have them come out in a different language. Okay, not really well, but you know it's going to get better and better and better. We are moving away from this reliance upon. I also think that at some point, which is a really scary thought, there may be thought recognition where you don't even have to say it out loud. It's just going to like read something in your brain and like it'll appear on the screen. And that to me is, you're going to have to learn how to edit yourself and do a good job of it before you go along. We are moving away though from the written word, and I think you see kids today who are unable to read alphabets in the US. They're cursive handwriting because they weren't taught that and they don't really know those letter forms. I think we're going to see the same thing. And you can also see the language that's sneaking in through emoji-like things. We'd rather send a picture instead of this, and we don't type out the entire words. We use the TLAs a lot, 3-letter acronyms. You're familiar with those, TLAs. We're also going to cope with the concept of artificial intelligence becoming more and more important in our life. And I'd like to think that it can't be applied to a lot of what it is that we do in communications, because a lot of this stuff is aimed for the routine work. Having said that, I also know that AI is actually sneaking in. I've seen a program that will help you write the quarterly business release to tell the outside world how your company has performed, because it'll look at the number of, what is the revenue increase percentage, and there are certain adjectives that are associated with that number, and if it's this number, it's these adjectives, and it will put together a reasonably decent press release about earnings. And when you think about it, it's a very, very valuable tool for an agency. You have to crank out a lot of these for a lot of different clients. A lot of companies that are doing news publishing are using tools like that to be able to, take stuff out of tables and turn it into prose to be able to share with people. So AI, I think, will begin to sneak in. The idea is, with machine learning, some of these machine learning jobs are some of the most sought after skill sets out there in the industry right now. It's the thing that's going to make the self-driving automobile possible. Is how do you do this? How do you teach a car all the things that a human driver knows how to do? Scary stuff. And every time I get into a discussion about self-driving cars, people are like, I'll never see that day. And I say, maybe, maybe not. I think stuff comes along so fast. I think there will be a day when we don't own automobiles. There will be some sort of a service you call up and the thing shows up and you get in it and it's programmed and it goes to the place you want it to go. And mine is, as long as all the cars are smart and talking to one another end of the roadway, I'm fine. It's when there are some stupid cars with stupid people driving them mixed in with the smart cars that we're all in trouble. It's going to be a little while. But I think AI can't do some of the higher level tasks, and one is the connecting with people part of it that we're so good at. And the other one that I think, I want to say is one of our futures and our locks on job security is we break patterns. It's like, we will write something, but then you have to put in something that makes it memorable, and so you sort of twist it. It's like the comedians that can see the world in a little bit different way, whether it's a Robin Williams or Jonathan Winters or a George Carlin. They just see the world a little bit different. And we do that with our communications by and large. Maybe not that press release about the earnings stuff, but how do you capture that reader's attention? How do you put something that's going to break through, that's not just additional white noise? That's that creative aspect. And I'm not sure that we can necessarily teach machines how to do that. At least not initially. They'll probably get better at it over time, but we got a leg up on them for a little while on this race. We talked already about bots. You guys are using them. That's Alexa, it's Siri. Many organizations, the communications people are responsible for helping feed that whole bot thing. And I guess the challenge I would put to you is, so often what we have been challenged to write, what we're tasked with writing, is that long piece of prose, write the story, and that's probably the wrong thing to start with, because nobody reads that long thing. Now the good part is it usually becomes a source document from which everything else is derived. And if you get that story right, then you can maybe get the subparts right. But I had a person who was talking about magazines. He said, we have the formula upside down. We spend all the time on the body copy, and we spend minimal time on the headline, the captions, the blurbs, the graphs, all that other stuff that the people look at first. And you know, if they get through those, then they might go to the other stuff. So we need to start thinking the same way about information that's being fed out through a bot. You know, how do you capture the essence of what it is that you're trying to say, condense it so that it works well in the spoken version as well as this, because nobody's going to, I mean, fewer and fewer people are going to read all the stuff that we historically have written, which is why we're moving away from the written word, right? So it all sort of ties in. I think we're also going to be seeing this world of augmented reality, virtual reality. It's, you know, what's real, what's not. And this isn't a Silicon Valley monopoly. I mean, it's everywhere. In fact, there's this place in Causeway Bay that's like a studio station that you can go, and they have games that you can play, but there's also things like Tranquility that you can do. They have also a virtual reality boxing ring where they've actually got the thing set up and you put the gloves on and you're punching, but it's set up that way. So if you haven't been, you know, that should be a good field trip sometime, just to go and see what it is we're talking about in terms of virtual reality. Clearly, it'll help with things like augmented reality for service techs and a few other people. There are going to be some pretty interesting new toys out there. Boeing, no, I guess it was United Airlines, introduced to their customers their new Polaris, is either first class or business class seating on their 777s using virtual reality. Like you put the little headsets on and you were sitting in one of these seats and you could look all the way around and see what it was like on the plane without ever setting foot in a 777. So, you know, start thinking about how can I use this in my communications mix in a way that takes people to places that they might not otherwise have a chance to go, to see things that they might not have a chance to see in a new and a different way. And some of you remember from that very, very first Star Wars, Princess Leia being beamed onto the table in front of Obi-Wan, and Luke with this, help me, Obi-Wan, you're, you know, my only help, or help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope. That whole idea of holographic projection from a recording has been around for a while. The idea of doing it live is somewhat new, although in rock concerts they're doing it, and now it's actually happening more and more on stage. You can use telepresence and project things live, so that the guy over here on the left side of the screen, you know, this guy is projected on a film, this guy on the right is actually live, and this guy is projected life-size, so they can interact in real time. So the next time I come to Hong Kong, I might not even have to come to Hong Kong, I just be projected here, and it wouldn't be quite as much fun, but I think we're going to see more and more of these technologies being used in different ways. This is how Nat King Cole and Natalie Cole got to sing together at one point, and how Michael Jackson and Tupac have both appeared on stage, even though they are, you know, long since passed. Interesting use of technology. I think one of the other things that's happening with technology to me, this is the Mobius strip for those who skipped that part of that math class. You know, didn't know and the whole idea is on a Mobius strip there is one side to a thing that looks as if it has two sides. So there, normally you would put a piece of paper together, there'd be like inside, there's an outside. This one, as you see, the marble is on the outside, but it's really, when it comes around, it's actually on the inside. There is no inside, there's no outside. I think the implication for us as communication people is that's the way our organizations are today. You know, external, internal doesn't really matter, it's all one. We need to find ways that we work that as a sort of statement. What I said to many people is the best way to reach an external audience sometimes is using an internal channel and vice versa. There's nothing better for journalists to say than, you know, according to a memo that was circulated to all staff, and the flip side is, you know, an employee probably doesn't believe the stuff that the internal people put out, but they will certainly believe it if it shows up in the outside press. So somehow, how can we work that system so that there is just one message? I think that's going to be increasingly important for all of us. I think that also sort of ties into the fact that we talked a little bit about when you go to work and, you know, Years ago, you were given a pager because you had an important job, a two-way pager if you were really lucky. That's all gone. This balance between the employer and the employee in terms of what's available and what does an organization represent. It used to be when you went to work for an organization, they had the information, they had the capital resources to be able to make the investments in technology, both for the workplace, but also in the products that are coming out. They also had the networks that maybe you were able to hook you to all these resources, the infrastructure, even training. Great training for managers and leaders, or technical training for the use of the products. That whole dynamic has changed because you go to work today, a lot of corporations have cut out a lot of those things because, again, if you want the answer to something, you just Google it or ask Alexa. If you really want to get capital, you don't necessarily have to have deep pockets or go to a VC. You can do Kickstarter to be able to come up with instant cash for an idea, especially for a small sort of organization. The networks that used to be within an organization are now outside or inside and outside. LinkedIn has actually recognized that, and they're selling more tools that are available to internal use for an organization, as well as this amazing network that's external. The infrastructure side of things, you just pull out your credit card and you can have servers and storage and processing that you can pay for as needed and scale it up and scale it down. You don't have to go to a computer company and buy this stuff and invest in all of it. You just put it on your credit card. And the training that you used to have to go inside to get, you can get from lynda.com, which actually now is a subsidiary of LinkedIn. So all the stuff that used to be the powerhouse, the why you went to a large organization because they had all these things and you'd be more powerful by having them, you don't necessarily need that big structure. There's a great presentation that I saw years ago by a guy named Ray Miles, who was the dean of the Haas Business School at the University of California. And he talked about the networked organization. It used to be that everything was vertically integrated. You had everything from manufacturing to production to sales, all under one roof. And we moved away from that a number of years ago. I think the same thing is going to happen with communications. That before everything used to be in-house, but now we've sort of come up with this mix that you've got agency people, you've got some people inside, you've got, and we've sort of done it all along, but I think we're going to have to learn how to do it even better to figure out how to sort of recognize that the power isn't always necessarily inside my organization. It may be there, or maybe I only need a little bit of this for this amount of time to accomplish this particular task, and I don't necessarily need to have it on staff or, and I was going to say, for corporate people, it's like, oh, I'll reach the agency. The same thing is going on in the agency side of things, as you guys probably know too. They don't necessarily need this person who has that expertise year-round because they don't have it, so they're tapping externally as well. So we're coming to an interesting world where the sort of traditional relationships are being busted up. So here's my sort of set of observations / counsel, and maybe what to think about, or maybe how to do things a little bit differently going ahead. First is explore emerging technologies, grab them, buy them. I think I'm the only one. How many of you ever played with Foursquare when it came out? Or its new version? Okay, there's a few. And now it's moved to Swarm. It's sort of like and I still play, I don't know why. I think I'm the mayor of my dry cleaner and of the gym where I go to work out, but that's about it. At one point, there was actually a financial incentive. I went to Whole Foods grocery shopping once, and they said, if you use and check in on Foursquare, we'll give you a 20% off, which brings it down to sort of a normal price. I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. That's worthwhile. Now I look at it more as they know something about gamification that may have some application in something that I'm doing in some project in the future. I want to explore it. The same thing is true with the Alexas, with all these sorts of things. Maybe you can't put it to work right now doing your job, but there's probably some element in there that you're going to go, if we took that and parked it with this, and if I talk to my IT people, maybe we could bring this together with it. So I think part of our job as communications people is to play, explore, learn, just challenge yourself to see what's out there. I also think we need to move away from the idea that one size fits all when it comes to some of this technology. There were times in years past when usually in the era of mainframes and even big client stuff, that we were going to do a rollout of SAP across the entire organization. We usually take 3 years years to roll out the whole thing, and by the time they rolled it out, it was obsolete, so that was sort of dumb. It never really had the features that people needed. We are now moving into the world of apps. It started over on the consumer side of things because you picked whatever it is that you needed to be able to do a job, and you didn't have to take sort of the standard issue thing. That's working its way into big companies as well. They'll have little app stores. But I think we're going to get to this point where not everybody has the same thing on their laptop or on their mobile phone, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, maybe these people, to be able to connect, and their collaboration tool looks different because their role is in engineering, but these people in finance have a different set of needs, so maybe they can use something different. I think maybe our job will move toward figuring out what the Rosetta Stone looks like. How do we get all these things to communicate and share and talk with one another across different networks? So, you know, while we'd love to have the cool water cooler where everybody comes and joins, I think we can't necessarily create that. In fact, I think our job is to go find the places where people are already meeting, using the tools that people are already using, and find ways to fit into their pattern as opposed to forcing them to fit into our pattern. That's just me. I think the other piece is most of us tried when we were doing our communications degrees to stay away from the part of the university campus that had the math and the science classes. And while I'm not saying we have to go back and do all that stuff, I think we need to find ways to understand and appreciate or buddy up with. I mean, one of my jobs, I found a person who did the HR database analysis and questionnaires and all sorts of stuff. And she was an expert in SAS, and I at least knew what SAS as a tool was. And I would come to her and say, however, could we run a report that would show us this, this, and this? And she would say, God, that's fascinating. I never thought about that. Because she was bored out of her mind having to run these routine things. So by challenging someone like that to be able to think outside of their space, we made a great partnership. I mean, she knew the tools, she knew the technology, she knew how to make that stuff run. I had the stuff that was sort of fun and interesting and different that she was able to explore and grow. So I think we need to learn how to do this. I think we're getting better at it. I've been very, very involved with the IABC Gold Quill program for years, and when I look at the caliber of the entries that come in, one of the things they say is we'll go over your objectives, and the better the metrics on them, the better the entry will be, and then can you show that you accomplished that? And it's not just how many people read this stuff, it's actually moving the needle on the business side. What was that business objective that your organization was trying to accomplish? And then how were communications tactics supporting that? And then can you prove that you did the communications right and you helped the business accomplish its goal? So we need to find ways to love the numbers and understand them and sort of make our way through them. We also as a group need to move from being the ones who create to the ones who curate, and some of that's that there's so much stuff out there, we can't be responsible for putting it all up there. We're going to have much more user-generated content, but our job will be able to sift through that and sort of help point out to people what's important and what's not, because people are saying, there is too much stuff out there, I need help. So I think we can become some of the guides to that. That being said, I also think that would be a great place for a tool to come into place that would help parse out information to people based upon what they wanted as opposed to what we decide they want. Because I think for the longest time, we have been playing the role of God and deciding what it is that the people in our organizations or the people outside organizations need to read. And at some point we're going to need to create this engine that you dump all the stuff into it and people will subscribe to the information and they'll get it on the device that they want, in the time that they want, in the format they want, and it's not necessarily going to look like what we would have designed. And some people may want text only, they want it instantly as soon as it happens. Others may, no, once a week is fine. And I sit in finance, but I'm supporting this unit over here in HR, so I need to have all that HR stuff coming to me, even though I'm not normally getting it because I'm not part of that organization. So we need to start letting it be sort of, instead of sender-centric, we need to start moving toward a world where things are receiver-centric. And I challenge you to figure out how to make it happen and tell me, because I'm not smart enough to do that. I also think we have to plug ourselves into the business and understand this business goals much more intimately than we ever have in the past. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen in communications people over the years that we have been successful at doing. I also think that we need to get very comfortable with being uncomfortable because there is not going to be a stable state for anything, I think, in the future. We're going to have to recognize that things not being in balance is okay. In fact, one of mine has always been, things move in cycles and pendulums. If you hang around long enough, you're going to see the same thing come back. I used to think of it as the pendulum swinging, like this. The only problem with that little model is that the pendulum eventually sort of stops here in the middle, which I think is a perfect place. It's sort of like, it's not too much that, it's not too much that, it's right in the middle. Somebody said it's not that way. It's not a pendulum, it's a hill. It's more like you start pushing things up the hill, and it takes a lot of effort to get it going. And once you get to that middle point, then it sort of takes off on its own, and it's like downhill from there, and just like zooms all the way in and crashes at the far end when you all become too much that. So, you know, clearly your problem with your organization, and I think this is actually the consultant companies like McKinsey and Bain and all those folks who come in and say, you know, we see your problem is you're far too centralized. What you need to do is decentralize your operations. If you pay me $10 million, I'll show you exactly how to do this. And then we all go from centralized to decentralized. And then we get there, we go, McCain, we'll call him that, comes back and says, your problem is you're too decentralized, but we can show you how to be more centralized, so pay us another $10 million and we'll move that way. And what we need to do is, when you get in that middle part where things aren't this and aren't that and they're uncomfortable, that's a good place to be. So, and maybe we can help sell that to people who want to go to both ends. I also think that we talked about networking and LinkedIn and all those sorts of fun things, that it's incumbent upon us to do this. And I go back and I actually think about my life, and I actually think I was a networker from way back. And part of that was I would always exchange business cards with people. When I got out to an IABC event, it's like, hey, you know, good to meet you, let's stay in touch. And I would put people into my, you know, database. I think at one time it was Lotus Notes. And then I started thinking, you know, that's sort of stupid, because every time somebody would change their phone number, I would have to update the database, and it's out of date, and they've moved on to another job. And it's like, so then along come things like LinkedIn and Facebook, where you keep track of your own stuff, not me, but let's connect. And so what I would do is, if I went and gave an IABC speech, I said, hey, let's connect on Facebook, or let's connect on LinkedIn, do that. I also said, as communications professionals, we need to build the network before you need it. And so to be able to connect with people, to understand strengths, to be able to find out where the next opportunity is, to be able to be ready if this isn't working out, to move on to the next thing, better build it. I was able to go to a workshop at LinkedIn, and they hacked this little system. They were able to show me what my network looked like. And it's fascinating to see. There's probably some names that some of you at IABC may recognize that have been around, but the different colors represented different parts of my life. So I think my IABC world was maybe this purplish thing, and then my HP world was this, and so other personal friends. So this is also gets that whole thing about Malcolm Gladwell's, you know, tipping point and the mavens and all those people. You really quickly find out who the connected people are. I think as communications people, we somewhat inherently do that, but I think it's important that we get better at doing this stuff. And one of the most interesting presentations I saw one time at an IABC conference, which I think could turn our world if we thought about it the same way in the networking, they said that the non-formal networks that exist in organizations, which we used to call the rumor mill and the grapevine, are actually powerful communications tools that we need to tap. And Innovisor, this networking-based company out of Denmark, says that if you communicate effectively with 3% of the population, you can reach 85% of your population. Now you need to know which the 3% are, and you need to approach them in a special way. You can't tell them how important they are, because then this sort of destroys their role of being informal. But that whole networking as a tool is important to us, both professionally to implement, but also personally to be able to grow. So I've got a little bit of time to be able to answer any questions that we might have. I want to thank the crowd that's been joining us around the world, video conference. If you've got any questions, you could probably shoot them in via email, or if not, I'll certainly give you my email address at the end. But any kinds of questions in the room?
Any question in the room, or any questions to the VC? So because we got the people on the VC, yeah. And then we got up to networking here. So we may give the priority to the people in the VC. Any location got question, you can unmute yourself and raise your hands.
They didn't fall asleep. That's the good part. You know, I see they're still awake. And I know it's the wrong time of day in many places. We have, if I'm correct, 26 locations, including Mexico City, London, you know.
And all part of the Asia
all part of
Pacific,
Asia Pacific,
India,
Australia.
Malaysia, Australia.
So thanks to all of you. But questions from HSBC around the world? We have a question
Yeah,
in the
we have
back
a question in the room. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brad, for a very informative presentation. One of the big topics in Asia is data privacy, and China has become a world leader in technologies like, for example, facial recognition. Recently, you undoubtedly know about Google's Project Dragonfly and how there's been an internal revolt where Google staff don't want to work on a China-based search engine. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you see in Silicon Valley in terms of the sort of overall attitude towards data privacy and the issues surrounding that. I think that for us here in Asia, that might be an interesting subject for you to expound on.
A great question about data privacy, and to me it's fascinating because you also now got legislation. Certainly the European Union with the GDPR regulations are a step ahead. I would say that a lot of it depends on the industry as well. Tech in general has been sort of open, sort of like an open race. We figure we get there faster if we share and move things around. So there's been, maybe to a fault, a lot of generosity. I've always looked at different industries move in different paces, different ways. For example, I thought it was fascinating that sometimes tech would have non-disclosure agreements about this, that, and the other, but if you looked at the automotive industry, which had been around for a long time, they could probably tell you how much the labor cost was in each one of the different companies based upon union contracts that were publicly based. So there's some things like personal information, like healthcare. In the US we've had HIPAA regulations, the Health Information Privacy Protection Act or something like that in place. I've always said that we've lived in a good time that a lot of people haven't been able to connect the dots. Your private information about something is like over in this little puddle, and the good news is the government is so inefficient that they can't sometimes share this stuff with this part of the government. The scary part to me is that I think we're moving to a time when this stuff is going to be available to all. I would say that Silicon Valley in general is probably just waking up to we better figure out how to do this. Much the same way they got into environmental things. We better figure out how to do the take back stuff, recycling stuff, instead of just coming up with new things and make them disposable. To be the right thing to do for the planet, we need to come up with this. So they're probably more at the awareness stage, further along for some industries, certainly something like financial services, something like healthcare. I think they're putting things in place. It's also, I don't know, I've always, a lot of things seem, it's like a game of who's going to win, cops and robbers, good guys, bad guys, cowboys, whatever analogy you want to use. This technology comes out and somebody's going to beat it, and then somebody's going to come up with a new one that's even better, and then we got, so Bitcoin is going to be able to, and block technology is going to be able to put in place. And the answer is yeah for a while, but then somebody's going to come up with a new one. So I'm not sure it's a race that can win. I think the other part that happens with all of this, which is a good thing, is that it makes all of us much more aware of the need to protect. Where before you sort of assumed that somebody else would take care of that for you, it becomes incumbent upon us to ensure that we're looking at our bank statements and making sure that we're not being charged for something, or that the phone thing, it's like, is this billing me the right way or not? So things that you took for granted, we can't. And that was, I think we saw the same thing in the U.S. in healthcare for a number of years. It was, you sort of trusted the doctors, and you assumed that they were going to charge you the right amounts, and they knew better than anybody else, and then you realized you needed to take responsibility for making sure you were getting the right thing. You had to ask a second opinion. You could question whether a doctor's opinion was accurate or not, because you could. They aren't gods. So, great question, and it's unfolding, evolving one. Other questions in the room or around the world?
There's one here.
Sure, please.
Thank you very much for going over these trends, and I couldn't help but thinking every time, is this going to change the gender balance of our profession? Because how many female computer scientists are there right now? How many female AI specialists? How many female big data specialists? And our profession, if I'm just looking around the room here, yep, pretty normal, overwhelmingly female. If I go to a computer science undergraduate program in Stanford or anyone else, it's pretty much the opposite. So what do you think is going to happen?
I think it's going to require some programs that I'm seeing put in place, like these STEM programs, to be able to do a little bit of the level field. And the last one I saw was actually called STEAM. So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. Somebody threw an A in there to make it STEAM and included arts, which I thought was actually good because it almost got back to that whole notion of we need to have well-rounded people who can't have just the geeky part of things. So it's going to be required, I think, to both deal with gender gap, but also I think we have not the diversity that we need in terms of ethnic backgrounds, all sorts of things. It is traditionally, most engineering schools produced white male graduates. That's changed. It's still mostly male graduates. I wouldn't necessarily say white, but I don't think we have the representation we need from women in the organization, and it's going to take a number of years. I remember years ago writing a story about in my employee magazine about women in management roles, and there were none here, but there were a lot down here. It's like, what's it going to take, and what kind of programs do you put in place, and how do you encourage people to do the right thing? And it takes enlightened leadership. This was at Hewlett Packard, and the CEO at the time was a guy named Lou Platt. Lou Platt, bless his soul, did the right thing. He was a single father at a certain point. His wife had died. He had 2 daughters in school. He said, I know what it's like when you get a call from the school saying your daughter is sick, you got to come get her. And you're the general manager of a plant, and you're in meetings, and you're sort of like, they're more important than this. And he said, I think it takes someone like that to be able to understand what it is that, the role of running household and taking care of kids tends to fall on women, no matter what society you're talking about, anywhere in the world. And until we come up with some way of balancing that and figuring out how to do a better job of work-life balance and making sure that women are not penalized for running family things and that we can make it equal and getting into different professions, we still have work to do. So I'm seeing encouraging signs, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time to work its way through the system.
Hi, Brad.
I was just reflecting on your comment about how we're moving perhaps from content creators to content curators. What sort of impact do you feel that has on how we can measure the impact of communications and whether it's effective, and are we helping the organisation to achieve its objectives?
Mm-hmm.
It's a question I'm grappling with myself.
Yeah. How do we measure our impact? And I think that I almost have to go back to one stat class that I actually remember from my MBA program where they described the difference between causality and correlation. I think more often than not, people come to us sort of expecting, show me the ROI. I'm going to give you this many dollars, show me what the ROI is on this stuff. And that's a real cause and effect thing. And I think what we need to be able to be is comfortable enough to be able to say, we are one factor in a very, very complex part of things, and we can show a correlation between what it is that we're doing and the final impact, but we can't show direct causality. Because I think so much is difficult to measure. One of the things I've always said is that when you're doing measurement and evaluation on communications, you need to approach it sort of at 2 levels. One is, can you do sort of a before and after kind of a proof that said, it was this way before, and then we implemented this, and about the only thing that changed was our communications program, and it was this. So it might be, take a survey right before the town hall meeting, and then one right afterwards, and the only thing that happened in there was a town hall, and so you say, that's what it is. But you also need to do that longitudinal study to say, maybe was that just a little blip, or did it go up here and stay, and then it went up some more? So you need to do both sets of measures. And I think what we need to do is be able to push back and be comfortable enough with stats to be able to say, yes, we were a factor, and if we get really sophisticated, you could say, in fact, we were the most important factor. Our correlation was a 1.2, where these other things were only this. Oh, okay. Because I think we need to, I've said all communications people need to take a sales course at some point. And I don't know how many of you had or have. I used to give out this advice all the time, and I never did it myself. I actually signed up and I took my sales training program training this like 6 months ago, and just getting an insight into how people go about doing effective sales was fascinating. I'm not sure if I'm much better at it. I'm not sure I would want to make my living doing that, but to understand that process and to be a little more comfortable with the, how do you close a sale? How do you listen to objections? How do you understand what people want and then act on it? So I'd encourage you to add to your list of other things to do. Take a sales class sometime just to learn what it is those people go through.
We have a question from Mexico via WebEx. So Brad, thinking about internal communications, how do we maintain the audience engagement over time when people's new habits demand fast content that becomes disposable in seconds? And how does high impact content, or what does high impact content in a corporate environment look like?
Well, I was going to say, one of the answers to the last part of the question is what does it look like? I think increasingly includes video. We're seeing engagement rates 50% higher for content that moves that has some sort of video connected with it. That being said, I think the video needs to be shorter. It's not a long thing. It might be that 30-second video from a leader of some sort announcing something. Maybe it's linked to something a little bit more, but we need to use video for impact to get people's attention. Just as sending out a text thing only is pretty boring, but if you put a picture with it, it increases it. Well, putting the video with it works for now. I also think that related to that though, I've seen a cool piece of technology that allows sort of random access inside a video. So instead of having to say, at the 3-minute mark on that video is where you want to see this, people can actually sort of search through a video based upon words. So this is a company called LAVA out of Los Angeles that came up with this analytics tool that they sort of take the spoken words in the video, transcribe it, put it as a separate track associated with the video, and it's time coded. And then if you sort of do a word search for things, it will tell you where to find it in that tape. So it's almost like a find and replace function, but it works with the video. And so they're using it for sports as well. In the US, for a football coach, they might want to say, show me all the times that our team had the ball inside the 20-yard line, and it was first down and 10 yards to go, and and I had so-and-so as a quarterback. And it can go searching through this stuff and go bam, 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 and show it so the coach doesn't have to remember. So I think the idea of accessible video is one thing. How do you attract people? I guess I look at some tools and some technology that people are using. I think of things like lately Social Chorus, Dynamic Signal, and some of those companies that are taking sort of feeds that almost resemble a Facebook feed and using that to reach employees in an intriguing, fascinating, high impact way. And they're going for people at the mobile device. I think they're saying we need to be able to reach people. If they're working in a retail establishment, we need to be able to reach people on the floor. UPS just rolled out, United Parcel Service, a feature using one of those two companies, I can't remember, where you're able to reach drivers and people who are working in the warehouse in a way that you couldn't do before, and they're using it in this high impact way where what comes across is there's a headline, there's a little video, and there's the 2-line summary, and if you want to do more, you hit link it. They also have tied it into apps, so that it could be your how you record your time on the job. It's almost like clocking in and clocking out can be on that. You can also reach your benefits from that same app. So I think if we're able to integrate our communications with some of these things that people need to do and want to do or have to do in their lives, and sort of link these things, we stand a better chance of them seeing some of this. That being said, I also think we get to go to this, not only do we make it more interesting, but we also let people decide what they think is interesting as opposed to what we decide is interesting for them. And that, I think, is going to be the real challenge. A tough one. But thanks, Mexico City, for staying up so late.
So, thank you for so-provoking sharings. I hope you enjoyed the event tonight, and we will have more coming. So now I would like to invite Virginia to share with you more.
Oh, I want to say thanks to you guys from IABC for hosting us here, and to the HSBC crowd for being able to bring us in here, and all of you for coming and spending time. And if you do need to reach me, I promise that I'm pretty easy to find.